read your question. Thank you,
Lovely.
judges. You may begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Arizona. My name is Gus Chin. I'm a municipal judge from Utah.
I'm Mike Miles from Birmingham, Alabama, and we're in the presence of real leadership today. I see Christopher Riano is on the screen with us this morning, the president of the National Center, who we're so very proud of. He joined us about a year ago, and we're so thankful that he is contributing his leadership to all of this. Chris, I think what you're fixing to see from Arizona in the next few minutes is why you've come to do what you're doing. I think you're going to enjoy watching this a lot. Canada.
My name is Candida Steele, and I'm retired as a judge on the U.S. Civilian Board of Contract Appeals. I handle federal government contract disputes around the country and have been with the program for about 20 years, thanks to Marcy.
Thank you. Please introduce yourselves and your teacher.
My name is Aaron Robidoux, and I'm a council person of our local NHS chapter.
My name is Daniel Manning, and I play on our high school's varsity tennis team.
My name is Christopher Manuel, and I am a section leader in my marching band.
And my name is Rihanna Peterson, and I am the concert master of our high school symphony. And our coaches are Ms. Lindblom and Ms. Litzenberger.
Lovely. Then let's proceed with question number 2, which reads as follows. Members of Congress are not only legislators, but they, quote, are also inquisitorial and should meet frequently to inspect the conduct of public officers, close quote. How effectively do you believe Congress has used its investigatory power? Explain the differences, if any, between Congress's power to investigate and the power of oversight. Which power, in your opinion, is more significant? How effectively do you believe Congress has used its oversight powers? You may begin, please.
In the movie Back to the Future, Doc Brown invents a flux capacitor and powers it with plutonium. Similarly, Congress creates bureaucratic agencies and gives them the power to do their job. In addition, Congress knows the purpose of each agency and keeps each agency in check. So, Congress uses oversight and investigations to ensure that the executive does not abuse its power.
Now, while Congress has successfully used its investigatory and oversight powers, partisan politics try to prevent Congress from maximizing these powers, just like the forces of nature tried to prevent Marty from returning back to the future.
The Constitution does not explicitly grant Congress the power to investigate. It is implied in Article 1, Section 1, which grants Congress all legislative powers. 1927 McGrain v. Daughtry recognized that the power of inquiry was an implicit authority to gather information in association with its legislative function. As such, legislative inquiry has been used to effectively discover abuse of power and pass legislation.
Some examples include the 1922 Senate investigation of the Teapot Dome scandal, which resulted in the imprisonment of the former Secretary of Interior. The Senate hearings conducted by the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence uncovered use of illegal surveillance on Americans by bureaucratic agencies, resulting in the 1978 Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act.
Even so, at times, Congress has overstepped its power to investigate. The 1954 McCarthy hearings probed suspected communists for their supposed un-American activities. In response, 1957 Watkins v. U.S. explained the focus of investigations was to expose corruption, inefficiency, or waste, not to investigate the private affairs of individuals.
Though their investigative powers have been used ineffectively at times, overall, Congress has investigated appropriately to pass meaningful legislation and detect executive abuse.
According to the Legislative Reorganization Act of 1970, oversight exists to review and study the application, administration, and execution of laws under its jurisdiction. So, through oversight, Congress acts as the eyes and ears of the people to review and check the executive and its bureaucratic agencies. This is accomplished through authorization, appropriation, Senate advice and consent, legislative and investigatory hearings.
Similarly, the investigatory power queries into the qualifications and administrations of the other branches of government, but also gathers information for passing legislation and judging the effectiveness of current laws. During investigations, Congress collects evidence and can subpoena witnesses.
Overall, the power of oversight is more significant because it is a broader power and serves as a cornerstone of the checks and balances of the federal government, whereas investigations serve as an essential element of oversight, detecting maladministration, abuse, waste, or fraud.
While oversight has been used successfully, partisanship impedes its overall effectiveness. According to political scientist Norman Ornstein, under a unified government, executive departments and agencies have no fear of Congress. In these cases, Congress seldom uses oversight to counter the president's agenda because they support the executive and its agencies.
On the other hand, in a divided government, oversight is more actively pursued. For instance, President Obama faced intense oversight from a divided government, resulting in several significant investigations, repeatedly resulting in no charges.
This act of oversight again occurred under President Trump's divided government, resulting in 2 impeachment trials. Partisanship plays such a significant role in impeachment that it was not until 2020 that a Senator, Mitt Romney, voted to remove a president from his own party. This clearly demonstrates the extreme partisanship evident in the oversight power of impeachment.
Doc, as the inventor of the flux capacitor, is the only one who can help Marty return to his timeline. While Congress is not trying to harness the power of lightning on top of a clock tower, it must rein in partisan politics in order to properly keep the government in check. Congress isn't returning back to the future, but rather back to its original intent.
Can I
Thank you.
ask a question first?
Please go ahead, Judge Steele.
You just said that their job is to rein in party politics. How would you do that?
One way that I think partisan politics could be mediated within Congress is to use third parties for investigations. Congress people are subject to their own biases and their own means in order while conducting investigations. And so by using third-party investigators and law firms, the law firms can investigate in their own nonpartisan way, separate from the partisan ways of Congress.
I agree with Aaron. For example, right now, Congress can start an investigation whenever they want. There's no format they have to follow. If they think something is suspicious, they can go ahead and just start an investigation. And this has led to quite a few investigations that have helped find important issues as well as other issues, but we want to just start them.
Let's take from that point, looking at Benghazi, which had about 6 different investigations, if I recall correctly. How would you combat or address what would be deemed frivolous investigations? And should there be a limit once a determination has been made?
One thing that I'm particularly concerned about is that investigations are mostly prompted in what we call fire alarm oversight, where news media reports on a story that Congress then picks up and investigates, relying on that news media. And a relevant example to this is that of bounties on U.S. soldiers in Afghan. And this resulted in 2 investigations into the Trump administration in the House Judiciary and House Oversight Committees. However, recently, Jen Psaki has said there's low to moderate evidence that this ever even occurred.
Further, one limitation that could be placed on the amount of investigation is whether or not the committee in instituting this investigation has actual jurisdiction over whether or not it can investigate. In House Rule 10 and Senate Rule 25, the committees are compelled to investigate within their own jurisdiction. And so this sort of limitation kind of adds emphasis to refrain from any oblivious investigation that can occur.
And these limitations not only should be put on the federal government, but on the state level. Right now in our very own state, Arizona, the AZ Senate, with the help of the Florida company Cyber Ninjas, is requesting 2 million ballots for the 3rd audit to see if there was election fraud within our own state. And this goes against the AZ statute 16-624, which states that these ballots shouldn't even be allowed to be open in the first place because they're not court mandated.
Thank you. Mr. Miles?
Well, I'm just so absorbed in their answers to your first 2 questions. In the Teapot Dome scandal, if President Harding and Albert Fall, the Interior Secretary, had failed to respond, had failed to cooperate, and no, just for the record, I did not know Albert Fall. I was not born yet, but I've read about him. I've read a lot about him, and I don't like what I read. If they had refused to cooperate with the investigation, the Interior Department was doing important work. But should the Congress have used its power of the purse to say, if you don't cooperate and bring us the records we need to investigate, we're going to cut some of your money off? Is that too disproportionate a response?
No, I don't think it is too disproportionate. This can recently be seen with Congress appropriating funds to the bureaucracies or executive, in that in 2014, Congress passed a Consolidation Act in which it gave an appropriation rider where they said the Department of Defense could not transport a fugitive from Guantanamo Bay to any other facility without notification to a defense committee, or else it will cut funding, appropriated funding. And so by using this, it's sort of a means to compel bureaucracy agencies to follow the Congress's mandated actions.
In addition, this isn't the only way to help move past when people won't comply. For example, if they feel that appropriations are too overbearing by limiting, then they can instead go through the judicial means, which this happened once in US v. Nixon, where Nixon refused to hand over documents and recordings surrounding the Watergate scandal. And so it went to court, and the court decided that they had to bring it over to help comply with the investigation going on.
Rihanna, this is not directed just to you, it's to the whole panel. The decision in that case was handed down pretty quickly, but it doesn't seem to flow so quickly these days. Is the judicial path to take the better one, given how terribly long it would seem to take for them to find out what was happening?
I would absolutely argue that other means should be given before judicial action is taken, such as appropriation bills, which can be passed faster than legislation, especially given that 2019 Judicial Watch Inc. versus Department of Justice was rolled 2 years after the initial subpoena was actually given to the Department of Justice. And this kind of progress can impede an investigation or otherwise oversight into the jurisdiction of the committee. And so in order to do this faster, they can do appropriations and they can commit further oversight in order to garner their influence before taking judicial means.
Aaron pointed out other relevant examples of oversight, but judicial means is currently the only way to enforce and make sure that a subpoena is appropriate. This has been seen in investigations into President Trump's tax returns. Investigations started near the beginning of his presidency, and only in 2020, Trump v. Vance and Trump v. Mesa was it established that based not on executive privilege, but based on Article 2, Section separation of powers, that this specific subpoena was unwarranted. They remanded the case and recently proposed, the House Committee of Oversight proposed a separate subpoena attempting to get the same information.
Oh, that's great. Judge Chan.
Judge Steele?
What powers, if any, has Congress ceded to the executive and judicial branches?
You said which powers have been ceded to the executive
Right.
and judicial branch?
What powers has Congress given up to the judiciary or the executive branch?
I would say that one of those powers is, as I stated earlier, the power to help work with subpoenas. We saw that even though it's Congress's job to actually offer out subpoenas, they've allowed the judicial branch to also go in and enforce this and help with congressional investigations in these ways.
Prime example of Congress ceding its authority and its constitutional obligation in Article 1, Section 8 to declare war to the executive, because the last time we declared war was World War II. And since then, the U.S. has been involved in 5 major conflicts. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution was supposed to address this in Andrew Johnson and was later resolved in the War Powers Act, but this has not been enforced adequately.
Thank you.
Thank you. You had raised an issue of bureaucracy as part of the concern or the problem. How do we overcome the level of bureaucracy that was raised that kind of creates problems with this investigatory process?
I'm sorry, I don't think I quite understand your question. Could you restate it?
Not at all. You mentioned that there's bureaucracy within Congress. Given the nature of the investigatory process, how do you overcome the bureaucracy to move things along more efficiently?
One instance of moving things more efficiently could be seen in U.S. Code 2, Section 192, in which it gives Congress the ability to enforce subpoenas through issuing fines or punishment of up to 1 year in prison. And so by instating this to whoever declines a subpoena, they would be able to enforce this to be able to make sure that the subpoena is given and that the investigatory is efficient.
But even with that, those who have been subpoenaed have snubbed their nose at Congress, and Congress has failed to utilize its contempt powers. So is that really a solution?
One recent example is when Eric Holder was held in contempt of Congress for refusing to comply with the congressional investigation into the Fast and Furious scandal. And this can only happen, I propose, on a bipartisan basis. Because that vote to hold Eric Holder in contempt was bipartisan, all congressional...
Go ahead and finish, please.
All congressional investigations and through the bureaucracy can only be efficient when they are bipartisan.
Time. Thank you. Well done, team. And the judges will now give you your feedback.
Thank you. Interesting approach, taking the movie line approach in terms of the forces of nature. I thought that was quite interesting. I do appreciate the task that you undertook of at least taking case authority, history, the McCarthy hearings. You talked about the meaningful legislation. You also dissected the sort of the partisanship issue. And also you talked about some current issues. So it shows that you were well prepared in addressing. The only thing you got stumped slightly on the ceding of powers, slightly, but nice job overall. Thank you.
Yes, I appreciated that you talked about the war authority in Congress. That was a good answer. Sometimes you just have to think for a minute to get an answer to our questions. They certainly are answered better than I ever could. So I have enough trouble thinking of the question, much less the answer. So you did a really lovely job. It's a great pleasure to talk with you all. And I hope that you will take this experience, and I'm sure it's, if you've gotten to this day, I'm sure you've been inspired enough to really enjoy this process. And I hope that you'll use the experience to represent the rest of us. You'll be great citizens, I'm sure, but I think you're even better educated than need be to be a citizen. So think about going into local or state or federal government. We need you. So thank you. You did a lovely job. It was a pleasure listening.
Amen to that. The most unique approach to this we're going to hear all day is Back to the Future. That was fascinating to me. Judge Chin, I love that. The thing I was trying to get out of my head was that Marty met and fell in love with his own mother before she became his mother and had to get out of the way so that his father could actually marry her. Sadly, I know some members of Congress who might not have backed off. They might have just not get out of the way. Please forgive me for that. I'm sorry. The second thing that I kept thinking was, I tell you somebody who would have loved to hear you today. John McCain would have loved to hear you today. I would have loved to see some of these subpoenas not be answered when Senator McCain was still there. He would have lost his mind. By the time he got through with them, they would have darn well answered some of those subpoenas, I think, just to get him off of them. And we miss that some. We miss somebody who's positioned as a conscience figure who can say, yes, you will. You're going to answer this, or we'll keep talking about you until you do. He would love to have heard you today. And the final thing I would say, Judge Chin, before yielding back is I mentioned Christopher Riano at the beginning because he means a lot to us. He's judged in this competition a bunch of times. Christopher Riano, the reason you're doing what you're doing now is because of Christopher Manuel and his teammates this morning. This is why you're keeping us going. It's so we can see the four of them and Nancy's team do what they're doing. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
thank
Good
you.
luck to you all.
Oh, thank you so much, judges, for that wonderful feedback.